Governor Abbott is working to protect his citizens from terrorism coming across the border. Well, speaking of terrorism, we got some disturbing news coming out of the Biden administration, where this administration is working directly with the Southern Poverty Law Center to not only silence political opponents, but literally to classify many people just like you and me as being domestic terrorists. Now, this is the same SPLC that inspired another domestic terrorist, Floyd Corkins, to attempt a mass shooting at the Family Research Council's office in Washington, D.C. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Tyler O'Neill, who's the first to report on this story. He's the managing editor of the Daily Signal and the author of the book, Making Hate Pay: The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Tyler, welcome back to Washington Watch. Appreciate you being with us.
Thanks, Jody. Glad to be here.
All right, so explain to us what's going on between these federal agencies and the SPLC and what you've learned about all of this.
Yeah, so what we know is that SPLC President Margaret Huang went on a donor meeting and bragged that the Biden administration, apparently out of the blue, just came to the SPLC asking for advice on their strategy to combat what she called the domestic terror threat. Now, the Biden administration did release a domestic terror agenda. It was very brief and didn't actually describe specifically what the administration is doing, and never made any mention publicly of the involvement of the Southern Poverty Law Center. I wonder why. But it's interesting because when I saw this video, and you know, the SPLC has done a lot of work with the Biden administration. The Biden administration, the SPLC has been at the White House 11 times with their leaders and staff, many meetings with President Biden directly himself, even though they classify conservative and Christian organizations, mainstream groups, you know, as you mentioned, like the Family Research Council, as hate groups on par with the KKK. So apparently that doesn't faze Biden at all. In fact, it seems like something he's going for because he nominated Nancy Abudu, an SPLC attorney, to a top federal judgeship. So the ties make this very plausible that the Biden administration reached out to the SPLC on domestic terrorism. Now, the SPLC does monitor a few legitimately worrisome organizations. But the fact that they put organizations like the Family Research Council, like Alliance Defending Freedom, on the hate map with the KKK, and the fact that they've kept them there after the FRC terrorist attack, it's just, you know, it's horrifying. It should terrify Americans that the Biden administration would consider this organization to have any credibility on domestic terrorism whatsoever.
Yeah, so we have very likely terrorists, literally, coming across our southern border, and nothing is being done really to stop it, nothing of any significance from this administration. On the other hand, we have this administration cooperating with the SPLC to identify law-abiding citizens as domestic terrorists because they do not agree with the radical left-wing agenda of this administration. Is that a fair portrayal?
Yes, it's very fair. In fact, it's even worse than that, because many of the organizations that are rightly raising the alarm about the tragedies at our southern border, about the fact that people on the terrorist watch list have been able to cross our southern border into the United States, many organizations are actually on the SPLC hate map. Organizations like the Center for Immigration Studies and the Federation for American Immigration Reform are on the map that has inspired terrorism, and the SPLC is going to charitable organizations trying to get them to blacklist these organizations and trying to silence critics of the Biden administration's open borders policy. And so not only do we have threats to Americans increasing from our open southern border, but we also have the people who are rightly raising the alarm about it being silenced by potentially directly by the Biden administration that seems to be relying on the SPLC.
Absolutely unbelievable that we are going through all of this. And by the way, I wish we had time to get into this more. In fact, take 30 seconds. The SPLC has a problem itself with domestic terrorism. It's a little ironic that they're accusing others of the very thing that they themselves have some guilt on their hands, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. Another SPLC attorney, not the one that Biden nominated to a federal judgeship, but another one was actually arrested on charges of domestic terrorism last March because he was involved in a riot where using Molotov cocktails. So this is, and the SPLC has for years carried water for the violent Antifa radical group that, inspired all of those riots in 2020, the most destructive riots in U.S. history when it comes to specific damage. So this is, this organization is turning a blind eye to violence. It also has its attorneys charged with domestic terrorism, and yet the Biden administration is more than happy to work with them on these issues.
Unbelievable. Tyler O'Neill, managing editor for the Daily Signal. Thank you so much for joining us today on Washington Watch. Great information.